negotiations on a free trade deal between Canada and the European Union are moving ahead more quickly than expected. Canada's Minister of International Trade, Peter Van Loan, and the EU Trade Commissioner, Karel de Gucht, met with reporters in Ottawa today. The two sides say a free trade deal would boost the Canadian economy by $12 billion a year. But critics have warned it could cost thousands of Canadian jobs. In a moment, I'll speak with Peter Van Loan, but first, here's the EU Trade Commissioner, Karel de Gucht, on why he wants the deal.
We are two developed economies who are already having a lot of trade. The trade volume is already now substantial. We see new opportunities in the services sector, also for some agricultural products. We hope that we can make progress with respect to the geographical indications. We want to make away with substantially all tariffs within a very short period of time, and we are convinced that this will boost trade in both directions substantially.
Well, from the foyer of the House of Commons now, you see we're joined by Canada's Minister of International Trade, Peter Van Loan. Mr. Van Loan, good to see you again.
Great to be with you.
Let's begin with the timetable here. How close are you to a free trade pact with the European Union?
Well, we're making good progress. We're ahead of where we expect it to be right now, but we've still got a fair bit of work to do, and we're hopeful, we're certainly on schedule that we fully intended before. What happened today was a stock-taking exercise where we took a decision that we had the basis to go forward and actually work on an agreement, that enough progress had been made.
All right. Now, this deal would be even more extensive for people watching here than the North American Free Trade Agreement. Tell us how.
Yeah, it actually has the name Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, which the Europeans insisted on because they wanted to mean more than free trade. Canadians, of course, we think of free trade as the high watermark because of the experience of the 1988 election, but of course that's supposed to mean that it goes far beyond simply the reductions of tariffs on goods to go to all kinds of things like rules for investment, for financial services, covering labor mobility, mobility of investors, things like rules guaranteeing access for government procurement contracts, the ability to bid in each direction. Mm-hmm. So we're talking a whole range of things. The Europeans want us to cover things like geographical indications, where we say that a geographic region from which a particular food product comes from, that they can protect that as a name. That's something we're going to debate, but that gives you a sense of how comprehensive it is, more than just reducing tariffs.
I want to get into some of that, but let's talk about some of those sensitive areas in the negotiations. I mean, there are concerns, for instance, about protecting shipbuilding in this country, supply management, government procurement at the provincial level. What's on the table with those?
Well, we've already taken the step of moving towards eliminating the tariffs on shipbuilding, so that's a different issue, separate and apart. But overall, just about everything is on the table. We have our interests that we're seeking to protect and defend, and we are having areas where we want to make gains, where we want to get additional access. But you can basically say almost everything in the economy is up for discussion.
Okay, you mentioned the question of geographical indications, and we heard that earlier from the EU Trade Commissioner. You know, this is the tying of product labeling to specific regions. What's the issue here?
This is something that the Europeans place great value in. They want to, if you think back, there was actually an earlier agreement that dealt with spirits and wines. So if you think of Champagne coming from the Champagne region, they wanted to be able to protect that name for wines that come from that region, sparkling wines.
Right. And, so you wouldn't ship Canadian sparkling wines and call them Champagne.
You could not do that, for example. And an example on the Canadian side would be, for example, we have Oka cheese. And that could be a geographical indication where we would say nobody else can make Oka cheese, only if it's coming from Oka, made in the traditional ways of that region, can it be called Oka cheese.
Right, so Parma ham, for instance, you'd only be allowed to, you could only call it Parma ham if it came from Parma.
That's right, and this is something the Europeans look for. Our normal position, our position has always been that we don't give that kind of protection on a geographical basis. That was modified a little bit with the spirits and wine agreement. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the things we're negotiating now.
And could that torpedo the deal? The inability to, to find some agreement on the labeling of food?
I find it hard to think that that's an issue that would be of such significance that we couldn't find a way to negotiate an understanding on it. And that was one of the key findings today in our stock-taking exercise. We looked at all the issues that are there between us, all the potential points of contention, and there wasn't a single one where we said there's no way we're going to get past that. There's no way that's too big an obstacle to surmount. So that means that everything we think is there can be negotiated or dealt with or accommodated one way or another, and that's what has to happen in the ongoing negotiations we will have. We've got the next round scheduled for January in Brussels, another round in March, and by then I hope we've made some real substantial progress.
Now,
right now we've sort of got the architecture of the agreement pretty much settled.
You know, many people believe what the Europeans really want here is eventually a free trade deal, a trade deal with the Americans, and they see Canada as a stepping stone to that. And I guess I'm wondering, do you believe that gives Canada, that gives you more leverage in negotiating your own deal with the Europeans, because they need that deal to then take it to the next level with the Americans?
There's no doubt, whatever they may say in public, they're looking at, in the negotiations, they're looking at the way we do trade agreements, the way we've done them with the United States, and they think at every step, how will this affect a potential negotiation in the future, even though they don't have one right now with the United States. I'm not sure
because your counterpart was saying today, no, we're not thinking about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, publicly, as you say, they're not tying the two together, but you are.
Well, we're not tying them together, and I'm not sure it gives us an advantage. Where it helps is that, for example, in decisions on architecture approaches, they're much more sympathetic to adopting our approaches than they might otherwise be, because they realize this is their first negotiation ever with a developed economy, that if they're going to go on to other ones like Japan and the United States, this will be setting a precedent. So what is the precedent that makes sense to set for those economies because of our free trade agreement with the United States? That gives our models a bit of an edge.
Let me, still with trade, I mean, your government's involved in negotiations with the United States on a trade and security perimeter. Where do those negotiations stand?
Well, that's something you'd have to talk to Lawrence Cannon and, of course, Vic Taves about border issues.
But from the trade perspective, why would a perimeter deal be good for Canada?
Well, our interest is simply in a free-flowing border, however you go about achieving that. And that's something that is a functional, practical consideration. That's Vic Taves' job to ensure with the Canadian Border Services Agency and his discussions with the Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano and Customs and Border Protection on the U.S. side. So we leave that to him. Our focus has always been dealing with the other protectionist measures that we might see coming from the United States, trying to resist them, things like Buy American policies. We got that waiver last year. We're the only country in the world to do that, to exempt us from those protectionist policies. You'll recall there was that Manufacturers Liability Act that would have required every manufacturer who's exporting to the States to have a legal representative in the United States to receive service. Fortunately, that bill hasn't passed, but that's one where we've also been very active, lobbying and engaged and participating in their political process to make sure that whatever decisions come out don't affect Canada's export opportunities adversely.
Okay. All right, Peter Van Loan, Minister of International Trade, appreciate your time this evening and best of the season.